Oh, I see it.
All right, this is episode 8 of Farm to Markets, where we're talking about everything from farms to stock markets. Today, we're talking about Afghanistan, the 4% rule, and how to get rid of your zucchinis. Towards the end of the Trump administration, it was announced that the U.S. would leave Afghanistan by 2021 as long as the Taliban met the terms of the negotiated peace agreement. Biden's administration stuck to the agreement and said the U.S. would leave by September of this year. As the U.S. was withdrawn, the Taliban has regained much of the country at a rate unexpected by the U.S. government, leaving people to wonder if we did the right thing or the wrong thing and what the consequences are. Joe, do you want to comment on that?
Well, first of all, is that I believe that we started losing the war in Afghanistan 5 minutes after we won it. We were relatively successful in getting rid of the Taliban. We started to struggle when we started our nation building campaign. Certainly, Afghanistan has been a wonderful staging place for counterterrorism activities to keep terrorists at bay. But ultimately, the United States has got to adopt a doctrine for Islamic states that will live longer than the current administration. A lot of our policies change every time we have a new elections, and it's very, very difficult to have successful foreign policy when our policies are changing like people change their socks.
Alex, do you want to give us your 2 cents?
Well, I agree with much of what Joe said, and I would say that is the decision correct to leave? Yes. It certainly looks like it was a botched withdrawal. I've been reading that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 40,000 Americans still in country with no real way to get to an airport to evacuate at this point. So that's obviously a horrible stain on this administration's record already, less than a year old. I think everybody knew that as soon as the U.S. left, the Taliban were going to take over. The government there was so corrupt, so inept. I mean, we saw, for example, the president, as the Taliban was approaching the city, rather than rally his troops and ask them to stand and fight, he stole $170 million in cash and helicoptered his way out of the country. I think it's absolutely the right decision, and we should stay out now that we are out.
Okay. And Drew?
This is certainly a very charged topic now that we've witnessed the outcome of pulling out our military troops in Afghanistan. My opinion is I think it was ultimately the least bad of the crummy decisions available. And that now that we've witnessed the adverse outcome, it's easy to get swept away in the hindsight bias. Let's say that I run a cost-benefit analysis on my personal life insurance policy. Turns out that I'm insured for $5 million when in reality, I need to be insured for $1 million. Only to find out days later, I'm diagnosed with a terminal illness. Was that decision still prudent? Yes. It just turned out there was a bad outcome. I'm not trying to lessen the degree of human tragedy that's unfolding in Afghanistan, but I like to think that when it comes to making decisions, the best outcomes can be arrived at by following the teachings of the Stoic philosophers, particularly Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, where you detach yourself emotionally from things that can cloud your judgment and just accept the nature of reality. Obviously, easier said than done. Certainly, when it comes to quantifying the value of human life, that makes it even harder. But I think that the opportunity cost of maintaining our presence in Afghanistan is greater than pulling out.
No, I'll agree with you. I think we saw in the Wall Street Journal there was that we're spending just an enormous amount of money per day and per year over there. And it's certainly hard to watch the images that you see from the U.S. pulling out and the Taliban moving in. But when our money and our attention is tied up in Afghanistan, it doesn't leave us much room to focus on China and some of the other stuff going on in the world. As far as consequences go, I'm sure there's lots of geopolitical consequences for the countries that surround it, and China and Russia have already made some attempts to make friends with the Taliban so they can get access to the country's rich natural resources. From a financial perspective, this stuff does not, as bad as it looks on TV, it does not really affect stock markets and financial markets at all, because these small skirmishes just have never had an impact on economics or any of world trade and that kind of stuff. So as far as the markets go, you're not going to see any impact from it at all. It's the same thing with oil prices. Oil prices have not moved, mostly because Afghanistan doesn't produce any oil, and they haven't since about 2013. So yeah, pretty big subject. But anybody else want to say something before we move on to the next one?
I would say that your point about there might be a peace dividend that we'll be able to use some of this the savings from our spending in Afghanistan to focus on greater threats like China and China and Russia. I don't see that happening. I think we're going to see the peace dividend is going to be spent on things like forgiving student loans, increasing the windfall for food stamps, and investment in human infrastructure like the Biden administration has been pushing for since he took over his administration. All of which I think will have an impact negatively on our stock market, or at least the economy, for the next couple of years.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think right now, the boogeyman, or the boogeymen rather, for the stock markets is what the Federal Reserve is doing or plans on doing in tightening their policy, and also how COVID-19 is going to continue to affect the economy. That's certainly getting overshadowed by the headlines in Afghanistan. But as far as markets are concerned, Afghanistan has about the same size a GDP as Central Avenue.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this short term, specifically related to this, it will not have any effect on the stock market, just like any other skirmish has in throughout history. It does not affect markets. But yeah, what you're saying, sure. Yeah, how the U.S. uses the money from this, yeah, who knows? All right, next one. So we'll talk about the 4% rule. So in 1994, a gentleman named Bill Bengen, or sometimes known as William Bengen, is a financial advisor in Southern California, created something he called the Safe Max Rule, which would later be known as the 4% rule in the financial planning world. The 4% rule is used to determine the appropriate withdrawal amounts for retirement portfolios. Barron's ran an article recently stating that Bill has decided to go from 4% to 4.5% as a safe withdrawal rate, which doesn't sound like much, but over a 30-year period, that 0.5% can really add up. And Drew, what do you think the impact of this is? Is it significant? Should we care? What do you think?
It depends on who you are as a person. The 4% rule, it's one of those financial planning concepts that gets the people on the tails of the bell curve extremely triggered. If you're a financial planning nerd, this is something that you really care about. It certainly should be taken into consideration, and we should certainly know a lot about it. But it's kind of similar caliber to the argument of whether you should pay off your home early or whether and invest the difference or not. There's right and wrong answers. Fact of the matter is we're operating in the world of unknowns. Sometimes you can get away with ignoring these financial rules of thumb, like the 4% rule. But when it comes to the 4% withdrawal rule, I'm a fan of it. It's been back tested. It's been stress tested under many different scenarios and variables. And the outcomes generally support the principle. Now, if that's not good enough for some people like to argue, well, I want a 100% guaranteed return that I'm not going to outlive my money. Well, that's fine. But if that's the case, why don't we just have a 0% withdrawal rate and put your money in cash? Obviously, that's ridiculous. But I think the answer is somewhere in between, whether that's 3.5%, 4%, or 4.5%. It's somewhere in the middle, and it comes down to balance. But 4% is a great place to start and a great benchmark to go off of.
Alex, I know this is usually your realm, but what do you think?
Well, like Drew said, this is one of those things that for most people, most of the time, is probably a good rule of thumb. If you're going to be taking 30 years of withdrawals at 4% annually, you're probably going to do just fine. But if I remember correctly, he said going up to 4.5% required going into small cap stocks in order to do that, to boost performance. And in another, I think it was a different article, might have been the same one, he's saying, though it's typically a 60-40 split in the in your investments between large cap stocks and intermediate term bonds, he's looking at 70 to 75% stocks now. So if you're going to go into small cap stocks or even just more large cap stocks, you're taking more and more risk just to try and find yield. And I think that's because interest rates are so low that the model is breaking down because you can't even get 2% on a 30-year treasury anymore. So it's a good rule of thumb, but in order to do what he's saying, you're going to have to take increasingly more risk, which may or may not be right for everybody.
So I'll agree with Alex, is that the article did say in order to get the 4.5%, because when he originally did this back in 1994, he only used two models. One was stock. He basically used a U.S. stock, large cap stock index, and then the U.S. bond index. And that was all he used to create his 60-40 portfolio. And to Drew's point, this has been rigorously back tested. And so the idea was this, is that we go through historically the worst market events that have ever happened. And we're trying to figure out which withdrawal rate was able to get the individual through a 30-year period without running out of money. And very consistently, the 4% rule has done, throughout history, has beat some of the worst market events. So 2008, 2000, and then some going back to the 1960s. If you'd have followed that 4% rule, you wouldn't have had much money at the end, but you would have still had money. So it's a very tried and true rule for making portfolio withdrawals. But also, kind of to what Drew touched on, is that it's just one gauge that we watch when we're pulling money out of portfolios. And the 4% rule is kind of like the pressure gauge. So is that if we're getting above 4%, that means you're putting more pressure on the portfolio to produce money for you. So if we're getting up into 7% or 10%, that's a lot that the portfolio has to replenish every year, and that's a signal to us that maybe something needs to change. Either you need to cut back on your spending, or we need to start pulling money from other places. But it's one gauge that we watch when we're trying to put together retirement portfolios. And there's a lot of forces acting on it. You got inflation, you have market returns, and just everything going on in the economy makes a lot of different or puts a lot of different factors on your portfolio. But if we know we're right around that 4% gauge, we can kind of tell how much pressure and how prudent the withdrawal amount going out of your portfolio is. So if it's 4 or 4.5, it doesn't really matter. It's also a little bit different because we use other things. Like if you start adding gold to the portfolio, you can actually push that 4% up to about 5%, because gold had performed really well through the high inflation years of the 1970s. But as a rule, it's just kind of a gauge, and it varies depending on what we have in the portfolio. And so if we're around 4%, we can kind of tell how we're doing as far as taking money out. But Joe, what do you think?
Well, I did go through bad markets. I went through 2000 through 2002, went through 2008, and all of us experienced a very, very short market decline in March of 2020 with the pandemic lockdown. And I can tell you that clients who stuck to their program and their process did way better than the people who panicked and ran for the hills when stock prices started to drop. When I first came in the business in 1994, this gentleman who was coming out with his 4% rule, I was telling people they could take out 6%. In those days, I could actually find AAA rated insured corporate bonds paying 8.75%, and the Whitefish Credit Union was paying like 3.5%. So it was easy for me to build a ladder of bonds and buy dividend paying stocks. And dividends in those days were paying 6-7%, particularly on utilities and energy companies. Right now, the 30-year Treasury is paying 1.8%. It's very, very difficult. You have to work really hard to get the 4%. When it comes to the 4% rule, I dogmatically stick to it when I'm in front of an audience of 1,500 people and I'm giving a seminar on good financial planning. But when the door to my office closes and we sit down and we discuss an individual's particular needs, I'm less dogmatic. In some cases, I'm telling people, yeah, you probably could take out 5%. And other people, I usually, based on their goals and objectives, I'm saying you probably should only be taking out 2.5 or 3. So I think for the masses, a 4% rule continues to be a good rule of thumb. But it's really important to sit down with a financial advisor who looks at your position objectively and gives you the advice that works well for your individual particular situation.
And I should point out is that the 4% rule was designed so that you would be able to outlast your money over a 30-year period in the worst market conditions. Most people are not investing in the worst market conditions. Most people that retired last year or 2 years ago did not have, a 30% drop like they did in 2008. So for those people that are pulling out 4%, typically you have almost double the assets in your portfolio than you did when you started if you just followed that 4% rule. So kind of to Joe's point is that we do things called ratcheting, whereas that, we start you off at 4% if we're worried about how long this money is going to last you. But then every year or every 5 years, whatever we think is prudent, we reevaluate how much money you're pulling out of your portfolio. And then we can ratchet that money up as we get deeper into retirement, depending on what your needs are and what's going on in the economy. So I probably should just point that out. All right, last topic is what to do with, how to get rid of your zucchinis. And this is not a problem for me because my zucchinis look weird. And Joe and I have talked offline about how I can remedy that for next year. But Joe, for somebody who actually has zucchinis that people would actually take or has zucchinis they're actually proud to show other people, how do you get rid of them? And Joe, how are you getting rid of yours?
Well, the local law enforcement departments and agencies have put out a notice that people should lock their cars because if they don't, people might be sneaking zucchinis in their back seats. I'm good for about one small zucchini a day, and right now I'm pulling about 12 to 14 zucchinis out of my garden a day, and I'm having a hard time getting rid of it. Some of my favorite ways to get rid of it is to sneak them in the back seats of people's cars. But besides that, zucchini is a great way to get rid of your, lasagna is a great way to get rid of your zucchini. You can replace sliced zucchini, cut it thin, and use it in place of your noodles. Something I came across here just last week is I made refrigerator pickles out of my zucchini, and they taste great. Wouldn't you agree, Drew?
I would.
Yeah. So I have fried them. I've grilled them. There's no way I can keep up with eating them. So if you want zucchini, call Cocoa Enterprise. We'll get you as much zucchini as you want.
It's like the Forrest Gump of zucchini. All right, Alex, what do you think about zucchini?
Well, Beth and I both like it. We eat it pretty often. We don't really produce any, but we do consume it. Our two favorite things to do with it, we have done it in lasagna in the past, and it's turned out really good. But we will just make a big batch of pasta sauce and zoodle it. We have this thing called a zoodler. Just make zucchini noodles out of it. That works pretty well. It's an easy way to replace a big bowl of starch for dinner with sauce on top and get something healthy instead. The other thing is I like to slice it long ways, brush it with olive oil, there's a Texas thing called chupacabra seasoning. Just shake that on there real generously and grill it on super high heat real fast. And that's always good with burgers or hot dogs or whatever instead of fries. So
Thanks. Drew?
I like to eat it raw, really. I think God put me in the northwest portion of Montana because you can only grow zucchini for a couple months out of the year before you get sick of it. And I'm pretty much there. We eat a lot of zucchini, share a garden with my dad. So he's been dropping it off on my porch and ding dong ditching. But been making a lot of zucchini bread too, which is absolutely delicious. I don't make it. My wife and my sister-in-law make it, but it's, I guess, the same way you make banana bread. You just use the zucchinis that are starting to turn, and you put it in the loaf, and that's doesn't even taste like zucchini at all. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a way to be resourceful and use it there.
Right. I guess I'm kind of agnostic on zucchini. I mean, for the most part, maybe my taste buds aren't very sophisticated, but I can't really tell, like when it's in a salad or something like that, like if it's zucchini or cucumber, it's kind of like the onions on your burger at McDonald's. It's like, yeah, they're there, but they don't really have any flavor. And so I don't know, like I said, we grew zucchinis this year. It was, they came out they look like pumpkins instead of, like what a typical grocery store zucchini would look like. So maybe we just did it wrong, but so I guess I'll have to wait till next year to find out what a fresh grown zucchini tastes like. But if we put it in zucchini bread, great. That's fine with me. You want to put it in lasagna, fine. If you didn't tell me it was in there, or you told me it was something else, I wouldn't know the difference. But there's something certainly satisfying about growing your own vegetables. But zucchini is one of those things where I've just never, I've never really been able to tell the difference between zucchini and other green vegetables. So that's where I stand on that. All right. Any other comments on zucchini before we put this one to bed?
No comments on zucchini, but if you can't taste the onions on your hamburger, we need to talk about getting you COVID tested.
I was about to say, that's, ugh. I can certainly taste the onions on a hamburger.
I'm saying,
begrudgingly so.
The hamburger at McDonald's, though, I mean, those might be like little pieces of styrofoam instead of like actual pieces of onion.
That seems like a big waste. Someone should tell McDonald's they could save probably millions of dollars a year on ingredients and their burgers still taste the same.
I lived in Canada for a number of years, and one of the things we did over there in some free time we had is we ordered an ice cream cone from McDonald's and had them put onion on top of it to see if we could even taste the onion. And you couldn't. I mean, it tasted like a vanilla. It had a little bit of a weird taste, but the flavor from the onions wasn't enough to actually ruin the ice cream. So I don't know. Maybe I haven't been to McDonald's in years, so maybe they've improved their onion quality. But or maybe I just have really poor taste buds. So all right, all right. That's it for this one.